So, in this lecture, I'll talk about measures of fertility, right? Measures of fertility, right? So here we've talked about death. Now we are talking about birth. Remember, demography, we will look at your entry into the world, the processes you go through before ultimately you die, right? Okay. Now, so fertility is about births, right? Basically, okay. So there are some um, um, terms like natality, birth, fertility. They are used synonymously, right? But natality is more general, referring to the demographic phenomenon in connection with birth. Okay. So what we are going to, if for fertility analysis, we are talking about total births, which include live births and cell births, right? And we're going to talk about some measures that we'll use to measure all this. Okay. Um, Remember that here we say we are going to deal with only live births, right? And but of course the births here, as I said, refers to what live births, but we can have still births and other and so forth. Okay. Now let's see. Okay. So there are some definitions of concepts like what we mean by a live birth. Okay, that is that you must be conceived, and the mother gets pregnant and then you are born. Okay, and sexual union, what have you. So you can go through them. These are just big definitions and so forth. But what do we mean? This is important that the fertility here refers to the actual bearing of children or occurrence of live births. That's what I said we will talk about. Okay. And it is more easily measured for what? Women, because men are not actually, we don't, give birth to babies and so forth. So even though some of the rates will incorporate men, we will get to rates that actually treats the denominator, or we measure it according to women. And even women, not every woman can give birth, right? Okay, so for example, maybe when you are young, you cannot, and then old age after menopause and so forth. So sometimes we'll restrict it to women of childbearing age. Okay. So these are just the terms, but I'll just skip those. It's good but I'm not going to ask you questions on all this, but it's good about it. Now, so this is good. Menopause, we all know. Menarche is when the first time they get a period and so forth for the ladies. Reproductivity is a extent to which we replace ourselves. In other words, so that's birth, of course, and so forth. Here, remember I talked about childbearing age, okay, or what we mean by fertility age. So in demography, we look at this from age 15 right down to 49. Okay, so please note this. So when we talk about childbearing age, we mean 15 to 49. Okay, in this course, that's what we'll be using. So in your when you are answering our questions, please take note of this. Okay, important. Okay, so I'll skip most of this and go to the measures, which is of interest to us. So fertility measurement. So fertility is ascertained from what? Data collected by registration of births. Remember, at the hospital, when a child is born, they will get the mother's name, the father's name, where the child was born. That ultimately becomes your birth certificate. It is through the collection of those vital registrations that we get data to calculate some of these fertility measures. Okay. Now, uses, remember we talk about mortality, uses of study of mortality. Similarly, uses of fertility measurements. What do you do? Why do we do them? Okay. So the measurements fertility are also necessary to quantify what birth performance of what a population. So whether people are actually giving birth. Remember we talked about population pyramid. Okay, when we look at it, if the downside of the pyramid is increasing, then it means people are giving more birth, more, right? So the population has what a younger age and so forth. And please take note of those pyramids, because I'll ask you questions on them as well. So you should know the shapes of the pyramids and how you can interpret them. Okay. Now, so they are also important in determining the size. Whereas death is actually taking people out of the population, birth is what actually replacing them and so forth. So it also helps us to compare the fertility levels and the number of populations during a particular time, and then also to get the time trend of what fertility in the population. So this helps us, fertility measures or data on helps us in doing so. So types of fertility measurements. We can measure fertility, and then it can be classified into what period and also what cohort measures. Okay, so a period, we are looking at a cross section, based on cross section of the population in 1 year. Okay, so period of 1 year, or some month, you can calculate it for it also. When we come to cohort, okay, we are talking about particular same people over a period of time. Okay, a group. Okay, so that's it. So so for the period measurements, we will be looking at crude birth rate. Okay, we'll be looking at general fertility rate, and there could be even child to child woman ratio and so forth. But just that we will not talk about the third one, but we'll talk about these two. What about the cohort? It's based on data which follows the same people over a period of time. So we can talk about age, fertility rate, total fertility rate, which will be that we will follow the woman right down from the smallest age at which you can give birth to, or the last age at which you give birth. General reproduction rate, net, these are all cohort measures, but we will only treat these two. The rest you can read about them later on. Okay, so we start first with crude birth rate. We've discussed crude death rate. So basically, number of births divided by all the median population. Please take note of the population here. So P is what median population. It's just like what we use for what the crude death rate. But remember, men do not give birth, right? So take note of this. So later on, we will be reducing the denominator. And know the denominator, because I will be asking you some in the question. So if it's crude birth rate, what is the denominator for it? Okay. When we talk about general fertility rate, what is the denominator? And so forth. Please take note of all those as when you study for the exams as well. Okay. So in a population, look at the population of Mauritius we talked about, okay, which has this as a median, assuming 220,000 are born. Remember the other one we were talking about deaths. What is the crude birth rate? The crude birth rate will just be B divided by the total population, the median population we multiply by 1,000. So it means that there were 19.6 births per 1,000 median population in Mauritius. Okay. So we look at this 19.6. Somebody will ask, do we have 19.6 of births? So usually when we have crude birth rates, you can interpret it like that. Okay. If we take it to 100, it will be 1.96. So we can say that approximately, if you take 100 people, they'll give birth to there will be 2 births, right? In that. Okay. Then what are the advantages? It's just like the crude death rate, right? Simple to calculate, but remember that it will also mask the composition in the population and so forth. So please take note of it. It's just like what we did for the death rate as well, but now in relation to births. So for example, it assumes that every age, you can have the same rate, but it's not the same, right? As people grow, the fertility reduces, and also if you are young, you cannot give birth, and so forth. Okay. So now that leads us to the new rate, which is called what, general fertility rate. Remember that the crude birth rate is simplistic. So the crude birth rate, suffered from limitations that relate to a total number of live births over to the total media population. Okay, but as I was saying, we know that live birth depends on a population of women, and even the women, it should be of fertile age. Okay, not the entire population. Okay, even for women. Okay, now, so to overcome this limitation, okay, incidence of birth is restricted to this. That's what I underlined earlier. Okay, so the general fertility rate is a single ratio of all births to the number of women of a fertile age, or what we determine or relate to as our childbearing age, which is 15 to 49. Okay, so the general fertility rate is what, birth divided by what, the women of this age. We multiply by 1,000. The radius, that 1,000 is assumed to be what? It's assumed to be it's assumed to be 1,000, right? Okay, but of course it can be 100,000 and so forth. So by default, we'll say that this will be 1,000. The radius is 1,000. Okay, so the general fertility rate, okay, is a ratio in the sense that it attributes all births to women within or this age limit, without further distinctions among them. So, but later on we will realize that we can have this, well, maybe between 15 and 19 you won't have, but 20 to 24 you realize that within this range people will give birth more, okay, to 29, and then from 30 to 34. Then from there it will what? A typical fertility rate will decrease, and so forth. Okay, so example of let's say in our previous example, if you observe that women between 15 and 49 in Mauritius in 19 was 284, then we can calculate the general fertility rate as well. The number of births, remember the previous example, the number of births will be this divided by the total number of women of that age times 1,000, we get 73. So it means that there were 73 births per 1,000 women of childbearing age in Mauritius. Okay, so what are some of the advantages of this general fertility rate? So the denominator of this is what? Is only women of childbearing age, right? So GFR is useful in situations in which direct evidence of birth is by age of parents is lacking. So you have you don't know the ages that they gave birth and so forth. Then it is easier that you use what, the general fertility rate, and it is used for very useful for comparing populations, because now you have restricted it to people, so you can talk about a country being more fertile than the other one and so forth. Okay, but of course that also depends on either whether there are incentives and cultural differences and so forth, which we know. So maybe for some religion they encourage more people to give more birth to more. They don't discourage people from using protection like condoms and so forth. So that will influence their fertility and so forth. What are some of the disadvantages? It's not adequate for very detailed examination of fertility patterns because it ignores the age distribution of women. We just put everybody together, okay, from what 15 to 19 instead of checking whether, as I was writing over the 15 to 19 and so forth, what really is happening within that age. Okay, and also it doesn't distinguish between women who are married and unmarried. Of course, we know that if somebody is unmarried, you can give birth. Okay, in some countries you cannot do so. Okay, so in that case, it will not help us to compare two different countries when you are you commit adultery or whatever, you are in trouble, and so for others, you go your way. Okay, so that's it. Okay. Okay, then we can also talk about age fertility rate. Okay, it's just like the age specific death rate as well. So here, the general fertility rate, even though it restricts the ages between 15 and 19, the age specific fertility rate is just like the crude birth rate calculated for a specific age, right? Okay, so like I previously, we can now look at this as I did over here. We can talk about the crude here. I wrote, here. So we'll talk about crude birth rate within each age. Then it becomes our age specific death rate. So that's it. And we can multiply by 1,000, okay, and so forth. Okay. Then we get those age specific birth rate. So it's just women within what age fertility. But remember that even though it's a crude way, this one is relating to women, right? Not the entire population. So that's what distinguishes between this and the death rate, okay? Or the death rate, which is total number of people, okay? Now, so next one is the total fertility rate. So the total fertility rate summarizes or the pattern of fertility exhibited by the age-specific fertility rate and presents a single index of total fertility. So that is, the fertility for a person who traveled throughout the entire childbearing age. So what does it answer? It answers how many children are women having nowadays. Okay, so if you go through, you start from 15 up to 49. What is let's say the number of children you can give birth to? That's what that's okay. So when we are calculating this, it assumes, and please take note of these three assumptions. So it assumes that mortality is constant, okay? That is, women will survive throughout the childbearing age. And then also fertility is constant, that you have the same birth rate until you get to your limit, and there's no migration. So you give birth and then you migrate. Okay, so that's the assumption that this total fertility rate uses. Okay, so how do we compute the total fertility rate? It is just the sum of what the birth rates, okay, for each the age specific birth rates, right? And then we multiply by 1,000 and so forth. Okay, however, remember that the age fertility rate, we can have equal intervals. So for example, if I do it like this, 15 to 19, 20 to 24, and so forth, and so forth, then you see we have five, the group contains 5 values, right? Or a width of 5. However, it's not always the case that you may go to, let's say, Ghana Statistical Service or any other statistical service, then you have the data, and let's say the other one is 20 to, let's say, 29. That comprises 2 groups, okay, 2 age groups. So it means you cannot use that equal assumption that we have done to do it, okay? So we can treat it as when it has equal number. So then remember that the number the number n is now 5, right? Because I have 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So you have 5 ages. So n here will be 5, right? And then we multiply by what? The number of the age specific fertility rate and so forth. Okay. However, if we have unequal intervals, okay, like I said, maybe from here you have, let's say, 40 to 49, and then here is maybe 29, but here is 15 to 19, then they are not equal. Okay, so what do you do? And so it means that the number, those numbers, instead of being 5, some will have 10 over here. No, here is 10, but here is what? 5. So instead, the n will go with what? Each age group. Okay, and you can multiply it by this, which is just the age specific fertility rate. So we can say that that is represented by F, which is the fertility rate, and you multiply it by that. So that's how we compute the total fertility rate. And if you take, for example, what we've done as an example, any example, and you do this, you should be able to find it. So that will be the end of our discussions on this fertility rates as well. Now, so what do I expect from you in the exam? It will just be like your mid-semester. So please pay attention to some of the assumptions and some of the computations. So for example, here if I ask you what is the numerator, okay, the numerator is not the entire women, right? It's just women of a particular age group and so forth. So I'll ask you questions on all what we have done. Multiple choice questions, so please pay attention when you read and so forth. Okay, so please pay attention to all what we have done. Okay, so in a recap, we started with the introduction to demography. When you get this, we look at the history. So we talk about history. In your eye, I ask you, you should know who we say the father of demography is. You should know those are some definitions and concepts, types of democracy, demography, and so forth. Then we look at the branches of demography. We also look at the sources of demographic data. Okay, population, population census, vital registration system, and the demographic survey, error in population, and so forth. Thereafter, we came to what? Analytical, basic analytical tools. We describe what the ratio is, what proportion is, percentages, then rate. We look at the central rate, the standardized rates, right? So take note of the differences and how to compute them. Then we look at population size and growth. So here, I expect that you should know about the balancing equations, okay? And if you are looking at it, so look at it how just a change in the initial to the time that we are interested in. Of course, birth minus the death, and also immigration and what goes going out, or immigration and so forth. Okay, so those are some of the things you should pay your attention. If the population is closed, okay, then it means there is no immigration or immigration, right? So this will be like that. So take note of that. I will be asking you questions on that as well. Okay, and yeah, so that the balancing equation, total population, the total population will be what? The population at time t, which will be the population at time 0, okay, then time the net birth, net between the birth and deaths, okay, and then the immigration and the emigration, right? Okay, so and then the averages of populations, we looked at averages of populations as well. We should look at it. Okay, then also measures of population composition, maybe age, sex. We looked at the age and sex, and so please take note of that. And now we talk about measures of mortality, measures of fertility. The last one we should have talked about is measures of nuptiality. Okay, so that is about marriage. Okay, so marital, remember that will lead to births and other ancillary issues. So that's what we couldn't do, but I think it is enough for us. So nuptiality is just about marriage, right? That's it. I'll ask you a question on just that, so please take note. So I wish you well in the exam. Yeah, and we will make available your IA scores the mid-semester scores as well once it's been done. There have been challenges with the machines and so forth. So once that, we'll make it available to you. So I wish you well in the exam. Pay attention when you are reading. Don't just gloss over it. Make sure you understand, and yeah, things will be well. So all the best in your exam. Thank you. Bye-bye.